In our last episode, we began a look at needs. We covered basic needs and suggested that in power exchange, unlike more conventional relationships, there is both a need and permission to talk about how basic needs like food, shelter, and sex fit with belonging and the need to have self-esteem and the respect of others.
In this episode, we're going to ask more provocative questions, like, is there a built-in need that makes us more likely to cheat on our partners? And where does resentment come from?
In this episode, we take a direct look at how our drive to get new partners may run afoul our desire to keep the partners we currently have.
We'll also complete our climb up the pyramid, looking at esteem, intimacy, and discuss what needs drive things like artistic expression. Finally, we'll look at how resentment when needs aren't met can undermine a relationship. And as we promised in the intro to the first episode, we'll tell you the big secret of power exchange. Last week, we looked at the pyramid of needs, walking through the basics, food, shelter, sex, safety, and protection, through belonging and affiliation, and status and esteem. This week, we begin with our need or drive to get new partners.
One disclaimer. Not everyone agrees with this exact breakdown of human needs, though it's among the best supported in terms of peer-reviewed research. The fact is, no model is perfect. We'd ask you to remember this. Even if you disagree with exactly how our pyramid is laid out, the problems and realities it describes are well documented and universal.
You don't have to believe our model is the best. Agree, it presents at least one common sense breakdown of relationship issues that are only too real.
Modern psychology tells us that our brain is not just a mass of random memory circuits with one small controller, our consciousness at the center. That would suggest our brains were like a 1980s DOS machine, only capable of doing one thing at a time. Today, most of us understand that even computers, those simplistic imitations of our brains, are made up of layers upon layers of software starting with tiny mathematical processes and leading up to major programs, all running in the background. Many of them, like Java or Flash, don't do anything that we can see directly, though we do notice when they don't work.
Psychologists who base their work on modern understandings of neurobiology and human adaptation believe that human minds have layers of processes, including several executive processes that run just below the surface all the time and exert a lot of control over how we behave, though they only demand the attention of the conscious mind when they need to resolve major issues. If our brain were a corporation, we'd be the CEO, and these would be vice presidents who run major portions of our life, only consulting us when a big problem comes up.
You see evidence of this when you eat lunch without much noticing the food or the hand motions because you're reading an article. Eating isn't an unconscious process like breathing, but most of us have scarfed down a sandwich without ever being much aware of it.
These vice presidents account for why many of us remember the experience of forming a conscious desire not to snack, but finding our hand in the potato chips. Our conscious mind isn't as much in the driver's seat as we'd like to believe.
Psychologists differ on how these processes are divided up, though Douglas Kenrick thinks they are very close to our pyramid, each vice president serving a basic human need.
It would be convenient, at least for me, if we could turn off the basic needs process that keeps us fed when we don't really need another potato chip.
Likewise, for a lot of humans, it would be convenient if we could turn off the basic process that causes us to look for new potential partners when we have one we are very happy with. Unfortunately, while some people are better than others at reining in certain of their mental vice presidents, it's not an easy process, and they may literally work against us, undoing our good work when our conscious mind has to be directed elsewhere.
Understanding these VPs is a key to understanding all needs, but is particularly important for thoughtful partners to reflect on when they consider monogamy, polyamory, or cheating in relationships. Part of the problem is that the VP in charge of making our partner happy is not the VP in charge of finding new partners, and they're prone to fighting over resources and priorities. There is some evidence that they talk chemically and may have some synergy, but there's no guaranteed off switch for looking for new partners, though in many cases, being happy with a current partner may deprioritize it a bit.
The neurochemical high of a new relationship tends to last for about 1.5 to 3 years, though for some people it's drastically shorter or longer. When that wears off and the milder chemical bond of attachment kicks in, the The VP in charge of new partners may become active, causing major problems in the trust structure. For some people, shutting it down is easy. For others, it's nearly impossible. For those people, it can become the 600-pound gorilla in the room, even if their current partner is meeting most of their needs.
Statistically, both men and women cheat in committed monogamous relationships, and this is the underlying reason why. We emphasize this point because our culture isn't well set up to deal with this truth. But while we can't say for certain, evidence among modern tribes suggests that at least some historical tribes may have been flexible about partnerships. In historical agrarian communities, the cost and risk of trading partners was high. Leaders often created special cases that allowed them to take new partners, like Henry VIII of England, who, when he was finally told to stop shuffling partners, refused the Pope and started his own church. But it wasn't much in their interest to allow common people to do the same, which argued for rigid social codes to prevent changing partners.
Rather than admit to this in the Victorian era, even as the Prince of Wales seated his mistress next to the Archbishop of Canterbury at dinner, Victorian moralists were putting the final embellishments on the myth that gives us the modern Disney view of love as a swooning commitment that will last forever.
Now, we aren't against love lasting forever, but the result of holding up fairy stories as an ideal is that modern people are woefully unprepared for a time when the getting a new partner need surfaces in their romance, and often become embittered towards each other, instead of seeing it as a natural process and working together to resolve it in a way that works for them.
As to how to resolve this need, we can't tell you the right answer. Only really make you aware of what's going on behind the scenes. In general, the options are monogamy, cheating, or some form of polyamory.
We feel cheating as a bad policy that tends to subvert the needs of both partners. It happens when the need for a new partner is intense, but the fear of losing a partner who meets all the other needs is also very intense, leading many people to feel trapped with no good options. A sympathetic and thoughtful partner might do well to consider that, rather than assuming that someone who has loved them in the past has suddenly decided to betray them out of a desire to be hurtful. This doesn't mean cheating is a good idea. Dishonesty about one need tends to snowball into dishonesty in many areas, and while many people believe that cheating secretly won't matter, it usually results in the erosion of other parts of the pyramid.
For people who understand the realities of human drives, polyamory can be a good answer, because it keeps the particular need from subverting and destroying the entire relationship. It isn't a perfect answer, however, and it does carry its own set of issues, including the possibility of attempting to settle other needs on a new polyamorous partner, unconsciously working to make the previous relationship redundant. We'll discuss polyamory and power exchange more in an upcoming episode.
Monogamy and fidelity are strong cultural values. For many people, to have a partner express sexual interest in another is felt as a direct attack on their esteem. For others, family history or even cultural programming can lead us to the feeling that if our partner finds another partner, we'll be abandoned. And since our culture intentionally confuses getting a partner with keeping a partner, some people may have a lot of trouble distinguishing between the two, and tend to end relationships in abandonment, even when they don't mean to. Since abandonment can be a real hardship, involving basic needs not being met, this isn't an empty fear, and this is why people who live close to the edge in terms of basic needs, or fragile in regards to esteem needs, infidelity can be a source of violence.
Again, we don't have an answer. What we do have is advice. Understand your needs. If the idea of your partner being with someone else threatens you, understand where on the pyramid that feeling comes from. If you choose to be polyamorous, you'll have a better understanding of your triggers and what structure will work for you. If you choose monogamy, you can communicate clearly why it is important to you and make it easier for your partner to understand and respect your needs. Most of us have a need for intimacy that exceeds our need for belonging. Intimacy isn't always tied to sex, but we're more likely to share intimacy with our sex partners. Though in many ways, intimacy blurs into the next step on the pyramid, which is family or parenting. One reason why power exchange relationships may sometimes involve roles like daddy and girl or mommy and boy, things like that.
Intimacy does involve a degree of trust, and when intimacy is present, sexual access may be a byproduct of that trust. Intimacy is easy to abuse, and while most of us crave it, we also have defense mechanisms to test the people who offer us intimacy, and make sure they're not trying to exploit us. Power exchange doesn't require sex, but it does usually require some form of intimacy.
Maintaining intimacy is a powerful drive, and it's the drive we idealize for keeping power exchange, or any relationship, going. As long as it's working, a relationship is likely to stay healthy. We think it fits well near the top of the pyramid because it's driven by other needs. If our partner is feeding the other gaps in our pyramid, we think that our desire to maintain intimacy with them tends to remain pretty strong.
Intimacy may not always look like the hot sex we associate with the early phases of a relationship. And if that need damps down or is redirected, it can be scary, making it seem our partner is rejecting us, when their feelings of commitment may actually be deepening. We think the remedy is being able to identify the things we share that aren't focused on sex, in addition to maintaining enough variety for sex to remain exciting.
Douglas Kenrick and most other psychologists who study human behavior from a standpoint of biology and adaptation place family at the top of our pyramid, for the simple reason that humans who focused on keeping their family alive were the ones whose descendants are around today to actually have needs.
In the power exchange world, we may create structures that look like families, but aren't comprised of real relatives, even elaborate families. Science tells us those bonds may not be as strong, statistically, as those we have with biological kin. But kinship is a powerful symbol that awakens reactions in our mind that go beyond simple friendship. And many societies, past and present, use symbolic kinship as a way to build ties that go beyond acquaintance. Our affiliation is our tribe, but those people with whom we share intimacy, but not partnership, may become very much like real family.
Family isn't a positive term for everyone. Some of us had bad relationships with our biological family, and nothing about the terminology seems comforting or engenders positive feelings. We feel that the relationships may be more important than the terminology. Having a small group of individuals we feel intimacy with may be more important for our well-being, no matter what the terms are that we choose to use. But what about the needs I have that don't fit into the pyramid? The need to sing, to play violin, to express myself.
Well, Maslow included a top-level category called self-actualization. Douglas Kenrick didn't include it in his map, as he said, not because it's not interesting and important, but because it is not fundamental. Research suggests that creative performances, like making YouTube videos, are hardly detached from other social motives. They're linked to gaining status and acquiring mates.
Well, when I need to sing, I feel a deep driving need. I don't think about status or partners. Sometimes I sing alone in the shower.
Isn't that the same thing you said about sex? That you felt a deep driving need?
Well, yeah.
And didn't you think about that romance and act out on it even when you were alone?
Point. The definition of needs is to some extent things that we are driven to, not things that we want logically. So our drive to do them isn't based on logical thoughts or analysis. We may not always realize why we do something that meets a need, only that it feels good.
But what about needs that don't feel good? Let's talk for a moment about counterintuitive needs.
That's a fancy way of saying needs you wouldn't normally expect, where you or your partner have a need for something that most people tend to avoid.
On the basic level, it's easy to understand. I try to avoid broccoli, but she actively seeks it out and wants it. It gets more complicated when it turns out to be about things that we're told that nobody wants, or even that we've been taught it's unhealthy to want.
Counterintuitive needs play a big role in a lot of relationships. Many people fall into unhealthy relationships to get counterintuitive needs met. We think power exchange can be a way to get those needs met in a healthy environment, and we'll talk about that in our next episode, BDSM and Power Exchange.
So, I don't actually need to learn all these things, do I? I mean, people have done power exchange for decades without understanding Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or any of these other things. If I put a collar on you, shouldn't it just come naturally?
Well, to some extent, what we're trying to teach and codify is what we think very good people managers understand instinctively. That said, even a broken clock is right twice a day, and even the myths of power exchange have some basis in how people actually live. So it's always possible for people to get it right more or less by intuition and luck.
And there are many relationships that are sabotaged because the initial chemistry, what's often called NRE, or new relationship energy, leads the bottom partner to be all swoony and carried away and put their own needs on the back burner. Many overblown and idealistic mantras about mistress needs are all that matter, or I live for my master, only make this worse.
In most cases, the needs of the bottom resurface, along with a ton of resentment because they were being ignored. Often that breaks the relationship entirely, sometimes bitterly. When it doesn't, it usually means a lot of changing of the balance, often with the top being forced to cede a lot of control.
And that's not unfair because the top has misused their control to meet only their own needs. At the beginning, we told you this video contained the biggest secret of power exchange. That's it! Meet your partner's needs. Tops who don't are being selfish, and it backfires and they find themselves in crisis, trying to put out the fire or lose the ship.
But don't some people really just want to live for another person? Don't some people want a selfish partner?
Certainly, some people do. But in doing so, their basic needs and needs for esteem and affiliation still need to be met, and that's the top's responsibility to see that they are. Some people have the knack for doing that instinctively.
We think it's great to have good intuition, but when you combine it with actually understanding what's going on in the relationship, we think you get better results. We've learned that most modern psychologists who base their work on human biology understand the mind is made up of layers of processes, rather than being a spongy mass of memories that only work when our conscious mind is processing them. The most powerful of these processes, which we jokingly called vice presidents, exist just below the conscious level and control a lot of our behavior.
Along with this, we learned that the vice president in charge of getting new partners isn't the same as the vice president in charge of keeping our current partner. That may cause deep conflicts, because even while we want to keep our current partner, a powerful part of our brain may be looking at different options. There's no solution to this other than awareness, self-control, responsibility, communication, and understanding.
We talked about the need for intimacy in family, which we'll discuss at greater length in future episodes, both in terms of how power exchange can work safely and ethically for couples who are responsible for actual children, and how relationships defined by fictional family roles like mommy or daddy can be a healthy part of power exchange. Finally, we discussed how many things we perceive as higher drives, like art or singing, are rooted in the need to show our value in order to prove our worth to our community and family or impress potential partners, even if, over time, those drives have become very abstract.
Counterintuitive needs.
We discussed that needs like control, confinement, pain, and humiliation form a part of the needs picture and promise more detail in our next episode.
Resentment.
We learned that in the initial excitement of a relationship, people may be willing to repress their needs, making it easy to create a dynamic where the bottom only fulfills the needs of the top, but that these needs resurface later and may damage or wreck the relationship. Finally, we summed up the big secret of power exchange. Meet the needs of your partner and yourself. The whole point of power exchange is that there is not some ideal your relationship has to match, whether it fits or not. You're free to model your dynamic to meet your personal needs and not fit some pattern imposed by society.
For VMAP, I'm James Gordon.
And I'm Rebecca Dahl.
Remember, there's no right way in power exchange.
Only your way.